Hey there folks, today I've got my Deere Comet 102C primary clutch off of my 1976 John Deere Liquifire, and I'm going to be rebuilding it for you today. These clutches were used on almost all John Deere snowmobiles when they were made. Deere actually worked with Comet to develop the 102C, and since then they've been continuing making them for almost 50 years now, so that tells you something about its performance. The other nice thing about the 102Cs is you can basically calibrate them for any sled. There's so many different springs and weight combinations that it'll just make your mind spin. But enough of that, let's get into it. Before we get too far into the video, just a little disclaimer that we do need some specialty tools in order to work on these clutches. The first one here is a spider removal tool. That is a special wrench that will end up going over the clutch and basically help us get it apart. And the second thing here is actually one that I made because the official tool wasn't available. But basically all it is a crankshaft taper, and I had a junk crankshaft that I cut this one off of, and then I just cut two little flat spots in it in order to hold it in a vise. You'll see how we use both of these later on in the video. I think the first thing we need to go over is the anatomy of our clutch. We'll work from the bottom to the top. First thing we've got down here is called our fixed face. This is actually what gets attached to our crankshaft, and it has this post attached to it that runs the entire length of the clutch. Next is our movable face, and there's a movable face bushing on the inside that rides on our post. Next we have what's called the spider. You can see the spider is in here, and it's actually screwed on to the post of the fixed face. And attached to the movable face is some cam arms, which we'll see what those look like a little bit later. But all we need to know is that as the clutch rotates, they fly up and press the movable face down. There's also a big coil spring on the inside here, if you can see it. And then holding it all together is our clutch cover plate. So first thing we've got to do in taking apart our clutch is remove our cover plate. So what I'm going to do is remove 1/3 of the bolts in a triangle pattern. Okay, those are those three. And then I'm going to slowly back off each of these in a circle so that way we relieve pressure equally on all of them. And you'll see our spring is going to push that up. We want to be very careful not to have our face over the top of this because the spring could send this flying up. I've been hit in the face with them before. It doesn't feel good. And we're just going to hold it down until our movable face drops down. Okay, then we can remove our clutch cover plate and our coil spring. It's at this point that I really start to do my inspection for what we need to rebuild this clutch. First thing I'm going to look at is our weights here. And as you can see, we're going to try wiggling them back and forth. And you want as little to no play as you can in that. And then I'll also wiggle it back and forth like this. So all of that movement means that the little bushing inside of our weight is shot. Next, I'm going to be removing the cam arm bolt. This one's an actual bolt, so I know it's been updated and maybe these arms have been changed. The older ones just had a pin that ran through, and then there was a roll pin that held them in place. Here we go. Sometimes a little persuasion is needed, but you can kind of see why, just how eaten away that little bolt is. And if we look at our cam arm, don't lose our washers. They're egg-shaped too. So we're going to need a new set of bolts. and a new arm, since this one doesn't have a bushing in it. Next, what I want to look at is the play in between the buttons of the spider and the towers on the movable face. So to do that, we take and rotate the movable face back and forth. And again, we want as little play as possible. This one's got, about a 1/16 of an inch. Not the worst I've seen, but it's still not good. Next, what I want to look at is the rollers in our spider. So that's these things, and that's what your weight rides on as the clutch moves. And I just want to make sure that there's no play back and forth, because what they're supposed to be is two little washers on each side of this roller. But as you can see, our washers have broken away on this one, and this roller is actually almost eaten halfway out of the spider. So that means that our spider is junk. Now, even though our spider is trashed, it's not to worry. They still make these clutches brand new, and you can get everything to rebuild a 102C clutch brand new. And the last thing I'm going to check for is my movable face and cover bushings. So to check the cover bushing, I'm just going to set this on here and try and rotate it sideways like this. So as you can see, there's some play there. Not the worst that I've seen, but if we're going to go through this clutch, it's going to have to be replaced. One unfortunate thing with the John Deere version of the 102C is that these cover bushings are staked in, and as far as I've been told, they're actually non-replaceable. So in order to get a new cover bushing, we're just going to have to get a whole new cover. If you've got a later 102C that isn't staked in, then you can take and carefully cut this bushing out and drive a new bushing into it. And then for the movable face bushing, same sort of thing. We just kind of rotate it sideways. And again, not the worst that I've seen, but really, it's also going to have to be replaced. So now that we are basically as disassembled as we can be right now, we're going to take it over to the vise and get it all set up to actually remove this spider and dig into this a little further. So I've got my arbor tool clamped into the vise, and I'm just going to take and set my clutch down on top of it. Then I've got my clutch bolt, and we're going to bolt it down and torque it to 60 foot-pounds like you would any other time mounting it up to your sled. I did have to take a washer and drill it out in order to keep this bolt in, because the standard mounting washer is a little too fat to fit inside of our spider tool hole. So this way we can keep our clutch bolt in. And now we put our spider tool over the top. There is a 1/2 inch drive on top. Otherwise this is hexed for 1.5 inches. And I've got a 3/4 inch breaker bar, so I've got a 3/4 inch socket. And now hopefully we can just put our breaker bar on and turn it right off. If you get one that's really stuck, you can take and heat up the center of the spider here. Not too much that you would, damage anything, just enough to break the Loctite that's in there loose. And that's a nice noise. Uh-oh, losing pieces. I dropped a button out of here. Okay, and there's our spider. Okay, then we have these washers. Don't use this as a slide hammer unless you're going to be replacing that bushing. And there's 2 spacer washers underneath there. Your application may be different, but we need to make sure we save these washers because we got to have them in there. All right, let's go back over to the workbench. Now it's about time that we get to start throwing parts with this. So first off, let's start with my new spider assembly. The kit comes with your spider, all new buttons and rollers, and a little tube of Loctite for when we put it back on the post. This is a good one that you can see just how eaten into there that little roller was, so that's why this spider was totally junk. This is actually a little bit of an updated version. You can see our walls right here are a lot thicker, and the buttons are a bigger diameter. In 1977, they switched over to this bigger diameter button, so 76 and below, which would be like your 100Cs, your 101Cs, and then the 1976 102Cs all had these little buttons. Everything else got these updated big buttons. Now it's kind of back and forth on the internet as to whether these interchange with your movable face, but I just put this in here and it fits. There's no play, so it'll be good to go. It also fits on our post. If you were going to be rebuilding your spider, they make kits with just the buttons and rollers. You'd be going through and popping all of these out. And then, so once you'd have your rollers out, you just pop your other button out and then replace it all with the new stuff. I think next we'll look at the movable face. Some things we want to look at here is where the weights go. We want to make sure it's not worn too bad. And then the big one is our center bushing. Now I have a new one because I was really planning on replacing this for the video, but upon further inspection, I think the post on our fixed is worn just a little bit because it wiggles. But also, if you get in here, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it too well or not, but there's still crosshatch in there, and there's crosshatch in this new one. So that leads me to believe that this bushing's been replaced before, and I really don't want to just replace it for the heck of it because these new bushings are like $45 a piece, and I'm not going to just throw that one away. So I was really hoping to replace it for your guys' sake of learning and mine too, but that's not happening today. And then lastly is our fixed face. So some things we want to address here. Basically, we just want to make sure that, and I should have mentioned this with the movable face too, but there's not a big divot here. A lot of times your belt will wear a little divot right where it engages, and you'll get the same thing on your movable face right here. My clutch isn't too bad, so we're still going to run it. What we're going to want to do with this is clean up these threads, get any Loctite out of here, and then also the same thing on this post. A lot of times they like to get like some gunk buildup, clutch dust and stuff just really compacted on here, and that will wear out our center bushing way faster. So I'll just take some emery and clean that up as well. And now before we reassemble, I'm just going to throw this in the ultrasonic cleaner quick to get rid of like all this baked on clutch dust. And same thing with like the back side of here. And then we'll be ready to go back together. Now that I have everything clean, it's time to start reassembling our clutch. First thing before I start reassembling, I'm going to want to take and lubricate our clutch, or as we're going, we're going to want to lubricate it. And you're going to want to use a special lubricant that dries, so that way you don't attract any clutch dust or anything and have buildup. That'll actually make your clutch wear out faster. I've got this stuff. We got it from our local shop supplier. It's meant for chains and whatever, but it dries, so that's what I like to use for this. Comet also sells their own stuff, whatever you want to accomplish that goal. I'll just take and spray some down. And I like to wipe it on for precise application because we don't want to get this on our clutch faces. We want those to be grippy, like that. I'll also do the inside of the movable face bushing, if I can get this in here. And just a light coating is all you need. And then I'll just take and slip this on. Careful not to touch anything. I can already feel it slides a lot better than it did without that when I was just playing with it. So with our movable face on, we've got our recommended 2 washers. Your clutch setup may be different. Deere says we need 2 washers. Come on. They get a seat all the way down there. Now our spider actually came with a little tube of Loctite that we're going to use. So I'll just break that open real quick. And I'm going to apply it onto our threads. Okay. Not sure how much comes out of here. I'm assuming we take and put the entire contents of this little thing on here, which really ain't a lot, but I'm trying to get it all around because we definitely don't want this spider working its way off. Okay, now that that is on, I'll take and start threading my spider on. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to take and lube up these faces here with my lubricant. Just a little wipe down is all you need. Now I'll take and thread the spider on, and I also went on the buttons with that lubricant. And we want to make sure that we have our movable face lined up with the spider, and we're just going to spin them together and thread this spider down onto there. Go until it's snug. And then we're going to use our wrench to torque this down to 250 foot-pounds. But since I don't have a torque wrench that goes up to 250, I've just got a 4-foot breaker bar. We're going to go until she's tight, as per the John Deere manual. That'll do. Don't mind that. Alright, now that it's on here nice and firm, we can bring it over back to the bench and finish calibrating this thing. Now that we're together, it's time to calibrate. And when I say that, I mean what size weights and what color spring. There's a bunch of different color springs that are different thicknesses, and they've got different spring rates. And weights are obviously different weights, and they actually have different shapes too. The ones that I got are new old stock John Deere, so I know that they're correct. And I also opted to go for the bolt update rather than the little pin that these originally came with. As you can see, it's just like a pin that you would stick this little roll pin through, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. The bolts make it way easier. For a 1976 liquefier, it is R weights, if you can see that. There you go. And a black spring. Some people say they want to use a silver spring, and I've got one of those too, but I figure I'd try it with the black one first, and I can always change it later. It's way easier to change the springs out than it is to change the weights. But to start off with, I'm just going to take my bolts out and wipe them down with my lubricant again, because that's a heavy wear area, as we saw before, and I definitely don't want that wearing nearly as much as it did before. So just a little wipe down would be good. I'm also going to just take and wipe down my weights in this lubricant, especially this top side where it contacts the roller. We want to make sure we have a good film there and down inside of the hole. Now to install the weight in the clutch, I'm going to take my weight and the 2 washers and just set them on the side like that, and then I'm going to take and set it into our spot. And then the bolt always has to go with the threads facing to the left, because as our clutch rotates, we don't want the bolt leading. So we're going to just put this in, and now it's just a matter of wiggling things around until you can scoot the bolt through. And now we can take and thread our bolt on and tighten it up. One nice thing with the bolts is that as you tighten them up, you'll actually draw in these posts up here. And as you do that, you want to make sure you don't go too far and tighten these bolts too much, that one, your weight doesn't move anymore, and two, you don't bind up here, so you still want to occasionally lift up and make sure that, it's still free moving. So I'll get these other two put in now, and then we can move on. Now lastly, we can install our spring and cover. I got a new cover because, like I said before, the bushing in the other one is non-replaceable. But to do this, I like to take an old belt and I'll just put it in the clutch like that. That'll hold up our movable face and make it easier to put these bolts in. So then all this is the spring pops in there and we put our cover in, and we got to take and press it down, and while we're pressing, threading these bolts and line up the holes. There we go. And just like I took them off, I'm going to put them back on in a kind of a crisscross pattern, just so that way it's even all the way around. All right, and then I'll tighten these guys down. Don't want to go too far because there is a torque specification for those. And then the other three. And now the very last thing we got to do is torque each one of these down to 10 foot-pounds. So that just about does it for our Comet 102C rebuild. If you thought this video was helpful, please leave a comment down below and like and subscribe for more if you like this sort of thing. And as always, see you next time.